thanks for taking part in the panel. And since we're talking about mass adoption of cryptocurrencies, I mean, we already heard Robert and Florian talk a little bit about the technology side. But what I would like to do is I would really like to talk about a little bit more about the practical aspects of it, since all of us are operating in a space where we're working on this like day by day, not as a visionary, but really, you know, we're looking maybe at timeframes of weeks and months, and are actually offering products and services which are either in the market or coming to that. And each one of us is probably looking at different angles of this. And so in this question that we have as a first one, it's actually about the global spread of cryptocurrencies. You know, can we actually really identify the drivers behind their spread? So not like what Robert has been pointing out, the inevitability of technological progress, but really, can we, you know, leave the technology aside and, you know, look, let's say a little bit about simplifying the process of maybe using cryptocurrencies, looking at, you know, maybe other angles. And I would really like to start with Jochen first, because, you know, with SoccerCoin, you must have thought a lot about these aspects in particular already. And I think you offer a very good entrance for us to open up the discussion. So
thank you very much indeed.
Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed for giving me the chance to participate here. When we talk about the mass adoption of cryptocurrency, I think it's almost like the phone. We all use that, and we have our smartphones in our hand, and definitely nobody is caring about what is the technology behind it. Yeah, it does not interest us at all. The only thing what makes us using our smartphones is that we trust it works. When I send a message, I want to be quite mass adoption of cryptocurrencies and digital payment systems is mainly driven by one particular point, which is trust. And this is what all applications of digital payment systems need to focus on, to build up trust, as also the traditional banking transactions, they are all done digitally. And they are done because it is trusted that the bank is a trustful entity that is doing that honorably and reliably. And to achieve the mass adoption of that, we must do everything possible to build up trust by transparency and also by stability in order to get the confidence of an entire big group of people, as we try with the sports fans. They just use it if they have a strong belief in what they do, and by that they need to understand that there is a real benefit for all the stakeholders in the entire system.
So can I just interrupt there and say, so would it be correct to say that SoccerCoin is maybe using the reputation of football teams, and that the fans have faith in what these teams are doing to, you know, build trust and build a bridge across, so that, you know, you actually have that situation where they'll use it because they trust the football team, and they trust then automatically also you, right?
Yes, it's a chain of trust, so to say. We at SoccerCoin need to start building up trust by the sports professionals with whom we work. They believe in the system. They feel confident. They are our testimonies, saying they trust in the system, and they believe in us that this system is working, that this is reliable. And because of these people with whom we work as our testimonials, we build up the trust that is needed for being relevant to various clubs and sports venues. And through the clubs, and the fans get the trust in what we are doing here. And as long as they understand that there is a win-win situation for everybody, for the fans, for the club, for the sponsors, and for all the stakeholders in the entire community, then they also have this emotional strength to go ahead with whatever technology is behind it. That is mostly not relevant for the people, as with our smartphone, which we use, and nobody really understands what is technically in the background happening when I'm sending a WhatsApp message. That interests nobody at all.
Okay, so maybe I can also ask Anita to comment on.
You mean comment on the general situation of mass adoption?
Yeah, I mean, again, like looking at, what are the drivers behind the spread of cryptocurrencies, and not from the technical aspect.
Yeah, I think the main driver will be, or is, the existential need for something. When I am not free in my payments, in being able to do uncensorable, transparent, free transactions with money. And I live, for instance, in a country that is like Zimbabwe, a kleptocracy, that's taking away my regional currency and is devaluating it all the time. Then I feel the need for a stable currency that can't be censored. And I think that's actually the most important thing about Bitcoin, and that's the thing that it fulfills. It's the money that gives you freedom and can support communities. And in the future, I guess it will also be the only cryptocurrency that gives you, or one of the only cryptocurrencies that gives you the right to privacy. Because if you look at all those other like central bank digital currencies or Libra that are coming up, these are all permissioned blockchains, or not even blockchains. They are just databases, and they are completely depending on the companies behind or the nation states. And so I think mass adoption will come when the like 5 billion people who have no bank account will see that this technology is working for them, and they won't see the technology behind, because it will be so easy to use that they just will use it. And so I think that's the main point. Yeah, and for us in Western countries and in Europe, I mean, it's a hedge against fiat currencies, and definitely a store of value. That's what I see.
So that what you've just said gives me an ideal segue over to Steve. So we've got we have now trust. We have an existential like need plus an expression of freedom, protection of privacy that might be interesting for those yet unbanked. And then, so we could say there's a political driver. There's also the basics of economic exchange and emotions, using like trustworthy institutions such as football clubs to give something. And now, Steve, we come to you, which is, I think, a lot about the usability and that technology disappearing, which is part of your book, correct?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, the book Be Left Behind, we spent 2 years researching, a lot about Bitcoin, so that we could understand enough. And I mean, enough as in we didn't even write everything that we know, but the idea was to help as we said, your grandma should know how it works so she can teach her grandchildren. So the whole idea was we went as deep as we could to understand it, so we could then roll back and say, how do we explain this to people so that, if you're sitting with a group of friends at a bar or at a restaurant or at someone's house, or you're sitting with your grandma, she should be able to read the book and understand it so that anybody can get started. The biggest problem with crypto, like any technology, is when you get started, it's too hard. You think back to the days of the internet where you had to type in an IP address. And if you think back to when internet started in the late 80s and became public, or even before that, when people were using work mainframes and other things, oh my God, it was so hard to even get to a website, let alone build one. And you look at today, you have things like WordPress, and you have other platforms just to build websites. You have URLs with naming conventions. that for most people, it's not that hard by comparison. But if you look at crypto, we're still asking people about things like, you know, looking at transaction IDs on Etherscan or equivalent for Bitcoin, you know, on a blockchain explorer, just to track a transaction. And you're thinking, there's no way I'm going to ask my mom to do this. It's just not going to happen. So we're very far away from adoption when you look at the usability aspects, because if my grandma can't do it, or my parents can't do it, or my non-technical friends can't do it, then how is anybody going to get started and do this? I mean, that's fundamentally the usability side of the problem. If I step back and I look at the technical aspect of it in terms of, like, you know, transactions and how you integrate people. I mean, we're all individuals on this call, and we all, as individuals, could have Bitcoin or other currencies or coins. But when you look at it from the purposes of a business and supply chain, just because I can take some Bitcoin and go to Starbucks or to a coffee shop and buy a coffee is great. But if you were Starbucks, you'd be sitting there saying, now what am I going to do with Bitcoin? Because Bitcoin needs to have the supply chain work. They need to go and buy the coffee. And that means they need to buy it from the supplier who makes the coffee. And the people that make the coffee, or who are, you know, buying the beans, need to buy it from the farmers who are actually growing the coffee beans, you know, in Kenya. So
yeah,
you actually look at it that
point.
way. There's a whole supply chain problem that we're just ignoring. And that, to me, is where adoption starts to come in, is where you can engage people across the whole chain to make it that the chain works. So usability is one aspect. Make it so my grandma can use it, but make it so that people that are running businesses can use it too.
Yeah, so which is, again, thank you very much. It's a perfect transition for Max to actually comment on, because I mean, the exchanges play a very vital part in all of this. And how do you actually, you know, given what we've now heard from our panel speakers beforehand, what would your emphasis be on what the drivers are behind the spread of cryptocurrencies?
I mean, there are many drivers trying to get this out to everyone in the world. But what I think will be the most important factor for cryptocurrencies to really get into the heads of people is that especially Bitcoin needs to become a really stable and safe store of value. Because let me rephrase that. When I once I heard about Bitcoin, and when I started with Bitcoin, I was very fascinated about the payment aspect of Bitcoin. And I thought that Bitcoin was going to be a really great payment system. And I walked around Graz, my hometown, and tried to convince all the merchants to accept Bitcoin. It was a couple of years ago, and they all turned me down because they asked what we've heard before, what should I do with Bitcoin? And if somebody would really try to accept Bitcoin, they wouldn't have another place to go with Bitcoin to spend this. So we are currently relying on exchanges like ours, so that merchants are able to instantly convert their cryptocurrencies to fiat. But to be honest, that's not cryptocurrency payments. That's just, I give you something and you get fiat for this. So this in reality has nothing to do with cryptocurrency payments. But once we are getting to the point that people start to rephrase their thinking in their heads and are not thinking about, oh, wow, this TV set costs me $1,000 or $100, but instead are going to rephrase this in terms of, oh, this is 1,000 Satoshi, then we have a whole different setup. But in order to go to this point, we need Bitcoin to become really a high class and very, very substantially more pricey assets than now, because only if you have a big market cap on Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency who tries to become important here, then the market cap in terms of what the whole of all the coins is representing in an economic sense needs to be really high. And I'm not talking about 10 billions or 100 billions, but I'm talking about trillions or thousands of trillions. And once we get there, then we will have a different situation. And I think, opposing my own view when I started with Bitcoin, that the first really important step would be that we have to establish the store of value character of Bitcoin. in terms of Bitcoin has to be worth very much in order to be able to then facilitate its payment character. This is the first part. And I think once we have a couple of more halvings, this might be the case. There's no guarantee, but this might be the case. And the second aspect is that we need to really, like Crypto Robbie said before, we really need to ramp up our developments on the second layer aspects of cryptocurrencies. So trying to facilitate all the payments of the world on a blockchain like Bitcoin doesn't make any sense at all. So I'm very fond of the Lightning Network. I think the Lightning Network will be the future of payment. I mean, let's say 5 to 10 years from now. But still, this really needs to be developed on a couple of different fronts. So the customer experience. I'm also like Florian using the Blue Wallet, which is nice, but only a tiny fraction of our customers who are using a variety of Bitcoin wallets are really able to send or receive Lightning payments. So to wrap this up, I think the first part would be that we need to get Bitcoin to a price that it's really a good store of value and a stable store of value. And the second one would be to ramp up on the development of the second layer experiences.
Okay, that's interesting. I always see that everyone always seems to talk about how Bitcoin has to be more and more valuable. But my question would also be, especially to you, Steve, don't you think that like Bitcoin might actually already be burned in the eyes of the public? I mean, especially if maybe it might be a good thing to cover all the different supply chains, but I guess people might just think, well, it's just another part of gold, and how am I supposed to do that? I mean, we already had Bretton Woods.
Yeah, so it's an interesting question because you're asking about money versus gold. And it's interesting you used gold as the example because you don't take gold and walk into buy a coffee.
Yeah, but yet, Bitcoin, if it's worth like
people talk
more
about
than gold,
using Bitcoin.
You know?
So I've always found this very odd, and I don't know if there's really any right answer to this. I mean, yes, we can use Bitcoin as a store of value. Yes, we can use it as an investment. Yes, we can use it for trading like an equity instrument or an FX instrument. So it serves more purposes than anything we've ever seen before. It's a mixture of a bunch of different things, which is fine. Should Bitcoin be the future, underlying currency, or should it be like gold and then there's currencies that sit on top? That's just an open question. I don't know the answer to that, to be honest. But what I do know is that the way that we're printing money, let's say in the US or the UK right now, we're literally destroying fiat in front of our eyes because you just can't go around printing money like that. And the nice thing about something like, Bitcoin as a currency is it's got a limited supply. It's fixed and that's it. And that means that over time, there should be the value of Bitcoin going up relative to fiat, which means that you can buy more with it rather than less. Whereas the opposite is true with fiat, is that over time already, you've seen that the basket of goods you can buy with $1, a pound, a euro has been decreasing in value over time. So now you start printing all this money, and you can be certain that if you know anything about economics, this is just going to destroy the currencies. It's going to absolutely destroy things later downstream because they're creating debts, they're creating loans that have to be repaid. It's going to create just an enormous amount of problem. And it's interesting because when you look at currency and you look at things like, and many people may not know this, but there's rating agencies like the Standard & Poor's, there's Moody's, there's Fitch ratings, and they do ratings of companies, they do ratings of countries. And I'm pretty sure at some point they're going to come back and say that they're going to devalue or downgrade the credit worthiness of countries like the US, the UK, other countries. And I can only imagine when they do that, what's going to happen, because when they do that, it automatically forces banks to increase interest rates, and it's going to create an automatic depression. And it's funny because I've never been one of these Dr. Doom guys, and I'm suddenly actually agreeing with Nouriel Roubini, because what he's saying now about the U and V-shaped possibilities of depressions and recessions are absolutely spot on. I mean, how are we going to avoid and get around that? I mean, he's correct.
He's just published an article. Yeah, he's just published an article about the 10 factors going forward about this crisis. Jochen, you seemed like you wanted to chip in on some of these comments. I mean, for me, I would like to say, what do you think actually your consumers and merchants want? Because what we're looking here is, on the one hand, it has to go up, people have to use it, need to cover the supply chain. You kind of made the impression you wanted to comment on that as well.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to refer to Steve that this is quite a very good point, because yes, the governments can print money as much as they want. They really can do that as long there is trust that the value of that fiat money is given. And what is the basis? For instance, at the US dollar, it is mainly oil, which is, or other commodities, which are securing the dollar is in its value. And that is quite interesting in the economic situation that we have, as there is a negative price on oil, which means that the backup for the US dollar is swept away, which will interrupt the trust in the currency. Because if all nations printing money, and they are just measuring their money value against each other, nothing really changes in the conversion rates between the currencies, as the volume of available money in the market remains high in all the countries. And because of a pandemic, Corona-19 crisis, the money volume is rising in all of the countries. And that only works as long as the commodities giving the trust that this is carrying this weight. And this is what we currently see, what never has happened before, because also in the financial crisis of 2009 to 2008, there has been raised much more money into the market than current. But we have not had this impact on the commodity prices. And therefore, this could also affect that digital currencies could probably get back to this stability that has been told before, that it is a really stable value coin, because there will be enough of capital available that is going out of commodities and is looking for new investment opportunities. And if there is, and if in digital currencies generally, there is a long-term investment strategy behind it, then we get the stability and not only a fluctual, I want to make quick money.
So can I put that then, because now we're kind of seeming popping into one of the questions that I've got written down here on my screen, and I want to put it to Anita. It's really, so do you think there is a time frame that we can actually now see the adoptions? I mean, you've mentioned the unbanked, you've mentioned like there has to be an intrinsic need. I mean, everyone's asking this, has the time come? And I mean, they've asked in 17, 18, 19, all the time. But is this now, can we actually now put a real, time frame to the adoption? Or do you think there's still all the other things that we've been discussing before that will stand in its way, even though it seems the global economy and even Rubini is painting doom and gloom, which always should be a chance for cryptocurrencies, no?
Yeah, but I think that the current system, or the people who profit from the current system, they will try to sustain that as long as possible. And even if Bitcoin will rise, and I don't mean in its price, but in its usage, they will fight it. They will fight that because, and that is, you can see it because I talk about Zimbabwe all the time, because I was in Zimbabwe in February, and there Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are banned. Of course, because the central bank and the government, the political elite, still wants to get money out of the system to enrich themselves. So what we see at the moment, I think, is the middle class who is bleeding or will pay for that. And it's a shift to the elites again, like in 2008, even more now. And so in the US, we see big companies being bailed out with the money that was meant for small businesses. So coming back to the question of the time frame, I mean, we are like in 1995 when we compare it with the internet. And back then, I also had, I had to learn how to use email back then. So of course, people have to learn how to use a Bitcoin wallet today. And so I think we are also in this time frame. It will be like 5, 10, 20 years or even longer until that plays out. And even then I see, or I think that, well, there will be many different forms of currencies, and Bitcoin will be one of them.
But then, Max, then I would like to also ask your opinion on something very similar. And I'll actually put a finding from a study that I dug up from the internet. Not that it means anything, but that they actually find that the adoption of cryptocurrencies is the highest where you actually have, I'll put it simply, banked populations, educated populations. So we're talking about America, we're talking about, say, places like Singapore and so on. And actually in the unbanked areas where you do not have any kind of financial services penetration, it's actually a lot worse. So putting that to you, there is this idea, again, because Anita's posing the systemic, well, the critique of the system, that technology companies are poised to take over, meaning buzzword, meaning being Libra, or even we've been talking about the Chinese cryptocurrency for quite some time. What's your view on all of this? Do you think there is a time frame? Do you think it will come? I mean, you talked about the economic necessity, value has to increase. But now I'm also looking at the politics, and how do you see that?
Yeah, so it's really hard to give a prediction on this, but my rough estimate would also be around 2 more halvings after this one. So on a broad scale, 8 to 10 years. But maybe the whole coronavirus thing is the spark that gets this thing going much quicker. Who knows that? But what you mentioned in the beginning, that we in the banked world are actually the ones using Bitcoin and not the ones in the unbanked world. So, I mean, that's totally easy to explain because we can afford to hold a very volatile asset that goes up and down. If you're living in a world where you really have the situation that you are let's say you have a daily budget of $5 or $2, you don't want to put this into an asset that you first cannot pay anyone with, and secondly, that fluctuates in value all the time. I mean, that's crazy. So we have to think the other way around. We in our banked Western world, we can afford to hold this volatile asset. But once we get to the point I was talking before, that Bitcoin really has a very high value and really high market cap, then all this fluctuation will slow down and will come to a plateau, because then much of the economic space will be going to be covered up by Bitcoin. And then these people can, with ease of mind, also hold these assets. But I guess this will be, as I said, yeah, I mean, 10 years from now. So this would be my rough estimate.
Okay. So Jochen, I want to ask you now we've looked a little bit into the future, we've looked at a couple of the drivers, and we can see that there are various things that need to be covered. Steve also mentioned the whole supply chain of things need to be covered. Now, you with your, let's say, sports supply chain, you're covering various areas, let's say, around the stadium. Let's get down to like the real basics and the present business situation. Obviously, you've been thinking a lot about, let's say, the wishes of what merchants would like. I mean, merchant in this case might actually be the football club, and then the consumers. So you're already trying to combine the demand with the requirement of trust, and starting to, dig into, let's just, I mean, in this case, it's a football or a soccer supply chain. Could you maybe illuminate us a little bit about, what are these requirements and needs that you see there?
Yeah, it's quite interesting because we had quite in the last few days a number of talks with reasonable football clubs throughout Europe. As the sports is locked down currently, they now see their weaknesses in their financial structure and in their income structures. They have no income on entrance fees. They sponsors holding back their monies because they say, we are not present in the TVs, we are not present in the view of 60,000 people in the stadium, so why should we we should postpone. And interestingly, they have to set up a future-orientated income structure. And digital payment systems and digital bank capital, they hardly can get in those days. Therefore, they're asking, how can we short-term making an effort to add another column of our income opportunities? We have the TV rights, we have the bonuses from international competitions, we have the selling of our players, trading our players, we have the entrance fees, we have the sponsorship, we have the merchandising. But what is on virtual reality? Yeah, if there is nobody in the stadium, possibly we can sell tickets digitally in a virtual world that is then broadcasted to the virtual reality goggles. Yeah. So there are coming new ideas and new solutions up that also can then be used when the stadiums can be visited again. And
that's really interesting.
That also gives, and that gives them also a quite a driver. They say, okay, that is interesting. Let's talk about how quick can we get started with that. Yeah, and by that, the football clubs also see the opportunity to have a much more tight relation between their fans and their sponsors if they really provide additional services. And basically our SoccerCoin system also addresses all of the personalities. There are the prestige thinkers. They want to have something outstanding. They want to have a USP. They want to be the first, the most modern, the most crisis resistant football club. They want to have the most modern POS equipped stadium or whatever. Yeah. So there are prestige thinkers in that. Then there are the safety thinkers where they think they are safety driven and saying, okay, if we do not have any visitors in the stadium, we need to have other sources of income from the digital world, from the transaction fees, from the sales of an own club coin. And then there are the convenience guys that say, that goes easily, yeah, because everybody needs to buy something, yeah, and as long as they use our club coin to pay their things, with any transaction, we make money. So there are different driving aspects in the minds of the people. What is key to that is that the club managers are not sports driven, but economically driven. And that they have a certain understanding of financial industry, that they are thinking into the future and not thinking into the past. We always had a bank as our sponsor, and what should we now do? Yeah, yeah. They need to think out of the box, and we are trying to help them to get new routes. Not only to have 2 or 3 columns on which they build up their income structure, but to have 7 or 8. And if one is getting away, it does not harm them existentially.
So, Steve, do you want to comment?
He said a lot of things.
No, but I mean, I would like to pick out the whole. I mean, there's new income streams, there's a new awareness, and you know, merchants and consumers alike seem to be willing to combine in new ways that cryptocurrencies seem to be quite beneficial for. So you know, it's like I'm not saying a secret sauce, but it's like. You know, previously you only had one type of ketchup, and now you've got like various different types of ketchup for each palette, a different one. You know, so seems like there's a way, right?
I'll make a comment about something that might, you know, create a conversation. So I think what we all tend to do is we think in vertical columns, right? So I'm talking about businesses. You have horizontal, you have banking, you have financial services, you have insurance, you have telecommunications, pharmaceuticals, medical, whatever. When you get to people, we have governments. You have the United States, you have United Kingdom, you've got Japan, Austria, Germany, whatever. So we keep thinking in a vertical fashion. But the thing is about blockchain is it's not designed to be thought through in a vertical way. It's a horizontal thing. It's about being able to send money cross-border. It's about being able to solve business problems cross-border, cross-industry, cross-entity. But when you look at the way businesses operate, the reason why businesses are struggling right now with the adoption of blockchain is simply because they can't seem to get their heads around the difference between a database and a blockchain. And why would I redo something in my business department, or across my bank, which is the industry I'm more familiar with? Why would I change that when my databases work just fine? And I have literally sat with, tier 1 banks having this conversation last year, the end of last year. And the answer was, you wouldn't. And they were like, then what do we need it for? And I said, because when you're dealing with interbank transactions between yourselves and your retail buyers and your sellers and your exchanges that are transacting, you need a mechanism that allows you to do that fluidly. And if you're doing it between multiple currencies, it becomes a bit of a problem. Oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. So when you start talking about things across border or across entities or businesses, it suddenly changes the mindset completely. So the best example I like to give people is just doing something like a mortgage origination process. So I want to buy a house. Niall, you want to sell me the house. Jochen, you're the banker. Anita, you're the lawyer. And we all need a way to operate and work together collectively, horizontally, for me to buy and for Niall to sell. And if you do an application process for the bank and for the loan and for the insurance and with the lawyer and with the people that do the inspection, you have to provide all your personal details to every one of them. And sure enough, along the way, someone's made a mistake because I didn't own my data. Everybody else took my data, entered it in, keyed it in by hand, or made mistakes in the process. Even though I submitted it online, still someone made a mistake and the data is no longer synchronized. And that's just a simple example. But imagine a whole process that was done horizontally. I think that's where actually Bitcoin solves a problem. It's not about us trying to buy a coffee in Starbucks. It's about us trying to transact and be able to go anywhere around the world and do something, or for currencies to allow us to have a much more seamless relationship between each other, and businesses to have a more seamless relationship with each other, which is a horizontal mindset. And we're still thinking vertically, trying to implement something which is a horizontal business or a horizontal mindset. And that's where I think we need to cross a chasm.
All right. That's pretty good, I think, for the last remaining impression. Yeah, because we're also through. I want to thank you. I just see that there's one question in the chat. Maybe Jochen can answer. If you were involved with Watford FC, was the first Bitcoin sponsored club in the Premier League, is obviously.
Yeah, there are in the Premier League, there are some of the clubs that are accepting cryptocurrencies. For instance, also Newcastle is quite ahead of that. They have a sponsor that is providing Bitcoin digital payment systems. So it's getting started there. But what is not yet implemented is a real club-owned payment system based on digital currency. That does not exist so far. There are some companies around. There is a company which is called Coin in Brazil. They want to provide that for the South American divisions. But let's see how all that develops. Yeah, but there are some football clubs already accepting digital payments.
I just want to add, I've seen that Watford is accepting Bitcoin over BTC Pay server. So you can pay, for instance, one of those, how is it called? These cabins, these luxury
lounges. Yeah,
lounges in the stadium for 1 Bitcoin, for instance, or for 2 Bitcoin.
Yeah. And a box. Box. Yeah.
Yeah. And with regard to Africa, that is quite interesting. We had a talk with the Citibank group shortly. They are also having a subsidiary bank in Africa, and they said that there are hundreds and thousands, if not thousands, of African football and soccer players all around the globe regularly sending money to their families to Africa. what, because of the, as you said, the kleptocratic banking system makes them a problem, which arises the demand for something reliable and safe. But we're getting back to this trust issue I rose up before. Okay. But there is a need, definitely, because of that.
Well, thank you very much. That wraps up the panel discussion. That was very insightful. And thank you for Sabine to bring these together, that I had the opportunity to talk to every one of you. And I'll stop here.